Hello and welcome to Sustainable City Network's presentation of a webcast that will feature the sustainability programs and accomplishments of the City of Portland, Oregon. In this webinar, Susan Anderson, Director of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and Michael Armstrong, Sustainability Manager, will explain how the city's emphasis on land use planning, transit-oriented development, and walkability has helped it become one of the most sustainable cities in the world. My name is Dick McGrain with Sustainable City Network, publishers of the online trade magazine scitynetwork.com. Along with webinars like the one you're viewing today, we also produce email newsletters, a quarterly print magazine, conferences, and other interactive content specifically designed for civic leaders and professionals involved in the day-to-day challenge of building sustainable communities. We reach readers in all 50 states and throughout Canada with quality and timely information on sustainability best practices, products, and services. We're thrilled that more than 650 leaders from communities across the nation have registered for today's presentation, which is sponsored by Crescent Electric Supply Company, the 10th largest electrical distributor in the United States. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's webcast. Michael Armstrong is the Sustainability Manager for the City of Portland, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. His responsibilities include policy and programs addressing climate change, energy efficiency, renewable energy, waste prevention and recycling, sustainable food systems, green building, and sustainability in city operations. Michael co-chairs the Planning Committee for the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and also chairs the network's Strategic Partnerships and Policy Committee. Michael received an MPA from Indiana's University School of Public and Environmental Affairs and attended Deep Springs College. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Susan Anderson is the Director of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. She leads urban design planning and co-development for Portland and builds partnerships to advance energy efficiency, solar, green building, clean energy technologies, waste reduction and recycling, and historic preservation citywide. She led the development of the first local climate action plan in the United States and recently completed the Portland Plan, a strategic plan for Portland through 2035. Susan has held director-level positions in the public and private sector and holds degrees in economics and environmental science, a Master of Urban and Regional Planning, and she was honored as a Distinguished Alumnus, University of Oregon, and as an Outstanding Alumnus, UC Santa Barbara. So now, Susan, please begin.
All right, thank you so much. We're very glad to be a part of this. We've watched a lot of these in the past and are honored to be one of your featured presentations. So what Michael and I thought we'd do today is walk through Portland's story of how we've become kind of grown from a mid-sized city with a variety of economic and environmental and housing and transportation issues to become a much more sustainable city. And we'll use our climate action plan as a framework really to tell the story of how we've made this journey over the past 20 or 30 years. And then Michael and I will just switch off back and forth here to tell the story. So I'll get started. So what a lot of people think of when they think of Portland, and I'm sure many of you have been here, is that it's tons of green and trees and mountains and rivers and an amazingly beautiful place. And it is all that, but we've had several decades, like many urban areas around the United States, the 60s, 70s, 80s, we were beginning to lose our shine. In the 70s, about half the days in Portland exceeded air quality standards. Too many cars, a lot of gasoline, inversion layers, all those collided to make Portland not a very healthy place. Like many cities at that same time in the U.S., our downtown was in decline, and we had built two new freeways that were shuttling people out to the suburbs. We were also doing things like expanding parking lots everywhere and parking structures all over downtown. But then things began to change, and at the state level, we adopted something called Senate Bill 100, which was a statewide land use planning tool. Every city in Oregon, under these new rules, had to adopt a comprehensive plan that met a variety of statewide goals related to everything from economic development to housing, transportation, environmental stewardship, all of those things. And as part of that development of our comprehensive plan, we adopted something called an urban growth boundary. So the urban growth boundary basically is a line that surrounds the 23 cities that make up the Portland urban area in Oregon. And we have in Oregon a metro-wide elected government that actually oversees our regional transportation planning. Many cities have something sort of like that in a council of governments. But what we do is we do our transportation planning together. So when we set the urban growth boundary around all of our area, that helped us decide where we wanted to grow. And it was the first time we sort of made this initial decision to grow up and not to grow out. Many of us had come from places to Portland and to the region where, you know, things had sprawled over valuable farmland and forest lands, and we really wanted it to be different here. So back to the picture of the parking lot, residents were beginning to see the need to just quit paving over such wonderful spaces, and more or less there was sort of a revolt when there was a proposal here at the site for a 10-story parking garage that was proposed. The result was this. This is Pioneer Courthouse Square, what we often call Portland's living room. It's kind of a multi-use space right in the center of downtown. It's our version of an Italian piazza. And similarly, I think the revolt against growing larger, like where I came from, Los Angeles or Texas City, all of that was kind of growing stronger. Next slide. And we shifted, as a result, we started thinking about transportation issues. We shifted the highway that was along the harbor, the picture that's on the left there, and in its place built Waterfront Park, which if Pioneer Square is our living room, then Waterfront Park is more or less our front step. It really offers a way for people to meander along the river as they head into downtown. The desire to continue to build freeways, however, was very strong in many people's minds. So this is a map that was drawn in the 70s and 80s about all the new freeways we were going to have in Portland. I think there were at least 7 new freeways proposed, but our mayor at that time sort of led another revolt all the way to Congress and used money that was to be dedicated for what's shown there, the Mountain Hood Freeway, and built our first modern light rail line. So the slide on the left is the beginnings of the freeway that was to be built. It's kind of a cool symbol for Portland. It's where we sort of stopped in our tracks and we switched course. And we now have light rail in all directions, miles and miles of both light rail and streetcar. And that first decision, I think, to shift huge federal and state and local resources away from the car and shift that over to invest into public transit was sort of a watershed moment for Portland. In terms of development, so we had big dreams in the 90s to take a large portion of the rail yards that are shown there up in the left-hand corner. It's an area just north of the central city, so it's really a part of downtown. And the goal was to make it into a very modern mixed-use area. And cities all over the world are doing this now. At that time, we had the tool of tax increment financing, and we brought together some tremendous public and private resources together to develop what became the Pearl District. The goal was to have 5,000 units of housing in this area. We now have close to 9,000 units. There's hundreds and hundreds of companies and retails in this area and some wonderful parks. Since the adoption of our comprehensive plan back when we did that Senate Bill 100 back in the 80s, we have kind of used land use as the tool and sort of the foundation for developing really more wonderful, walkable, vibrant neighborhoods, both in our downtown and throughout the city. Now I'll toss it over to Michael.
So from that slide at the beginning showing the, here, so the long-term framework that the City of Oregon requires every local government to pursue, establishing how it's going to grow over the next 20 years, has actually been a really important part, and in a lot of ways a model for the work we do on issues like climate change, where there's not something that's solved overnight with a few quick and easy policy or program investments. This is something that requires systematic approach, long-term institutional change to deliver over time. And in Portland, we're really fortunate that the work on climate started so many years ago, so more than 2 decades ago now, and Susan herself was instrumental in the very first carbon dioxide reduction strategy in 1993, 5¼ inch floppy diskette and all. And we'll use these plans as a framework to talk through some of what I think really does differentiate Portland today. It's also true that some of this is a cautionary tale, where we have been working on this for 20 years, and we still have a very long way to go. So we should be clear this is a marathon, not a sprint. And we are making good progress, and we all really need to redouble our efforts to get there. In that spirit, Portland now is on its 4th generation climate action plan. This one was adopted just a few months ago now, and lays out essentially our trajectory for the next 5 years en route to this long-term goal of reducing emissions 80% by 2050. And the previous work really is beginning to produce results. These are, I think, things more typically associated with Portland than the haze and brown cloud of the very first picture we showed. So we're now seeing significant reductions in energy use, big decline in gasoline use per person. We've got a bike commute rate that's now over 7%, 9 times the national average. Recycling is 70%. Transit ridership has doubled since 1990. Kind of the list of accomplishments just continues. You know, these are the things we love to talk about, and we will share these on this call. We'll also try to point out some of the areas that we're still wrestling with, and we get a lot of value from other cities in comparing notes on what works and what doesn't. We hope this can be in service to that kind of shared effort. So green building, solar, eco roofs, investing in our natural infrastructure, and also doing our own, working in our own city government. This has been a long-standing priority since the early 90s, and we're now able to point to utility bills that are $7 million less than they would be on a business-as-usual trajectory. And so when we can illustrate how carbon reduction can drive economic and efficiency benefits in our own operations, that gives us a great platform to work with others in the community on. So you put all of these: energy, land use, transportation, recycling, waste reduction, all of these efforts you put together to get carbon emission trends, and this goes back to 1990. You can see that the carbon numbers for Portland, and here it's labeled Multnomah County because we do this as a joint city-county effort, and it is important to our efforts that this is not just the city, but we're working together with the county. And so county-wide, our emission numbers are down 14% since 1990, and on a per-person basis, that's a reduction of 35%, since we've had really sustained population growth since that time. It's both heartening to see the departure from the national trend, because I think work here began in earnest earlier. It's also really important to see that national trend bend down as well. And, we'll see what the numbers look like over as we get into 2014, 2015. Certainly, we think we're going to be able to continue to reach this globally. We hope that the national trend follows that same pattern. Equally importantly, I mentioned the population growth over that time, so up about 30%. We've also seen another 75,000 jobs added to Multnomah County. And so even though emissions are falling, we're growing in population, we're gaining jobs. This is also a really important illustration of how it is possible to decouple local growth from carbon emissions. We show this slide to visitors from China, and they take a picture of it. So I think it's an important model and trend that we need to continue ourselves. I think we all have an interest in seeing this pattern replicated elsewhere. We also know we have a ton of work to do ahead of us. So from that peak around 2000, emissions now are on a trajectory locally to get to this long-term 80% reduction goal. We've got an interim goal of a 40% reduction by 2030, and so each be on this 1.5% decline per year to get there, and then step it up a little bit on down to 2050. But we are very roughly on track for the moment, and we've got our work cut out for us to to reach those targets. Even while we've got these long-term carbon reduction goals, we're looking at continued growth, and that actually creates a lot of opportunities in terms of how the community is shaped, our transportation systems, how people get around, and what's close to them. So we're seeing opportunities to build out neighborhoods that are more walkable, that are well connected by transit, by bike paths, by other sorts of transportation options, and we're going to need those things if we add, these 270. Add another. This must be on the next slide. To our current 270,000 households, we're expecting another 120,000. So 2% annual growth, expecting another 140,000 new jobs. So this is over the next 20 years. We're planning for that, and our comprehensive plan shows that we can accommodate all of that growth within our existing land boundary. And so that's a really fundamental intention here, that this is how we're going to grow. We're going to grow up, not out, and we're going to serve that growth with really good transit, with walkable neighborhoods, with transportation options, and we're going to do our best to keep that affordable, both in terms of the cost of housing and the cost of both owning and managing our transportation needs. And this is really where climate work fits in this larger context. So all we succeed in doing is reducing carbon emissions. We're absolutely not getting to our goals. In the introduction, there's a reference to the Portland Plan, which is a citywide strategic plan that was adopted a couple of years ago, and it very clearly articulates our goals to be a healthy, prosperous, and equitable community, and we need to be achieving those even while we're growing and even while we're reducing carbon emissions. So if we do our carbon work, our sustainability work, it's integral to be advancing these other community priorities at the same time. And that's not always easy, but it often is doable if we're really deliberate about it. So the Climate Action Plan that was adopted earlier this year, as Susan mentioned, we'll use as just a quick framework to talk through some of these priorities, since it spans a lot of ground. This mirrors many climate action plans across the country, around the world, and actually shares its framework way back 20 years ago to Portland's original climate strategy. And we know what needs to be done. It's a question of figuring out the implementation strategies and sometimes political will or access to financing. So buildings and energy, transportation, urban form, solid waste, food, natural systems, climate preparation, how we work with the community, and then what we're doing in our own operations.
Okay. Well, we're going to split up talking about some of these different components of the plan and really try to tie them back into how they impact sort of the city's overall sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we absolutely are not just talking about the environment. We're talking about creating great jobs, and we're talking about creating great places for people to work and live, and having more resilient and equitable communities. So starting with buildings and energy, much of our carbon emissions actually come from the use of natural gas, fuel oil in buildings, or the generation of electricity for use in our buildings. So we've worked really hard in partnership with our local utilities and a group called the Energy Trust of Oregon. The Energy Trust is the nonprofit that was established more than 10 years ago to collect basically our public benefits charge. So everyone pays a 3% sort of fee on their electric utility bills, and that funding goes through to the Energy Trust, who gathers this all together, and then that way is able to run programs on a much more regional basis instead of being split up by different cities or different utilities. We've had some really dramatic reductions in energy use statewide, and in particular in the city of Portland. One very specific example is something called Clean Energy Works. We were very successful in getting a $20 million grant from the U.S. Department of Energy to start this program. We realized, for those of you in government, that if we kept it in-house for a really long time, that it would probably get slowed down, so we spun it off as a nonprofit, which allowed it to move quicker, faster, kind of separate from the city. The program offers low-cost financing for home efficiency upgrades that you then get to pay back over time on your utility bill. So it's a great partnership with our privately owned utilities, where they will do the billing actually on your electricity bill or your natural gas bill. We are a month or two away from completing our 5,000th, if I could say that word, retrofit. So 5,000 homes. I think we're at 4,900 and whatever, 85 or something. So very soon we will have reached 5,000 homes weatherized. Similarly, in the 90s and in the 2000s, if we can say that, so the past 15 or 20 years, we have had partnerships with utilities on multifamily programs, and more than 40,000 apartments were weatherized or improved during that time. With Clean Energy Works, which has now changed its name to Inhabit, we focused not only on the energy efficiency and money-saving benefits with the program. We very much were thinking holistically or in a more sustainable manner about who was being hired to do the work. So we had a major push to hire women and people of color, and we set, in some ways, sort of requirements for minimum pay. They are now kind of moving on and seeing that this model is a really good way to make changes in homes when people don't have upfront cash. I mean, if you had $10,000, you're way more likely to, improve your kitchen than you are to do insulation that no one else can see. So we were looking for ways to come up with upfront cash, and we have now found different sources for that funding up front. So they're now offering seismic retrofits also, which is a big issue here in the Northwest. Many of our buildings are unreinforced masonry or wood frames sitting on foundations, but they're not strapped to those foundations. And the likelihood of a major earthquake in the Northwest is very high. So we're looking for ways to help people overcome the upfront costs of making the seismic retrofits. And now Clean Energy Works is also looking at upfront cash for solar. You may not think of solar and sunny Portland in the same sentence, but we do have relatively strong support for solar and for other renewables, wind and others, with statewide tax credits and incentives. Oregon has a renewable energy standard, which requires that 25% of load be new renewables by 2025. We don't count hydro dams as renewables. You can see on the pie chart there that's a separate category. Many people also probably think of the Northwest as that place that just runs on totally on the power of the Columbia River, and that's just not true. It is pretty true for Seattle because they were smarter than we were in that they created a public utility very early on, and the federal government gives sort of first dibs on federal hydro projects to publicly owned utilities. So we get some of the benefits of that whole system, but not like Seattle. Anyway, we get our power from two private electric companies, and one of them, in particular, Pacific Power, is still a major coal power generator. So those coal power plants are not in Oregon, they're in Montana and other states, but the power is then transmitted to Oregon. We do have one coal-fired plant still in the state. We've successfully come to an agreement with Portland General Electric and the Oregon Public Utilities Commission, and that will be shut down by 2020. We also used to have a nuclear plant, and more than almost 20 years ago now, close to 20 years anyways, we, through, sort of local pressure, we were able to shut that down. And the amazing thing was that we managed to make up the loss of power, so more than 500 megawatts of power, totally through energy efficiency and conservation. So I think that's something they said that couldn't be done, and we've shown throughout the state that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit of very inexpensive energy efficiency and conservation that could happen to replace that nuclear plant. So, as I mentioned, even in Oregon, we do get a few cloudy days here. But Portland is still a fairly good place for solar. We have more solar capacity, really, in terms of solar isolation coming into the area than Germany does, and they are such a leader in this. So we knew, oh, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years ago that we really wanted to focus more on solar. So we started a campaign about 5 years ago and went from about 200 systems to more than 600 in just 1 year. Funding for that effort pretty much died out for a little while in 2013, but we have been able to keep a lot of the momentum going. The program that really made the big shift for us was very neighborhood-based, and we called it Solarize Portland. How it worked was neighbors would join together, and anywhere from 30, 40, 50 or more households would agree to buy a solar PV system. And then we would help them with the technical issues to make a bulk purchase with a request for proposals that would then come in, and all that together would help to reduce costs significantly. A lot of what we did really was just kind of hand-holding almost and kind of sorting through the issues. When you go to do something like this on your own, it's kind of scary. When you go and do this with all your neighbors, it's not only not scary, it's sort of an empowering kind of thing for the neighborhood to do. So it's been super successful. We actually got the funding to do this, so I think this is important for other cities from our Economic Development Fund at one point to manage and kind of coordinate the effort. Once the recession hit, some of those funds have dried up, but we felt like there were huge job opportunities, and we wanted to be able to actually use some seed money from economic development to show that indeed you could have a major impact on job creation locally, because when you do these projects, so much of it is labor. One thing that we haven't been able to do yet, but that we're looking to do, is to sort of broaden this into multifamily structures, community solar, where individuals can buy into a system that's on another building, like on a public building, a school facility, where you don't have the ability to have a system on your own home, but you want to be able to buy in and have the benefit. So we're going to be moving more in that direction. Michael.
All right, so changing gears to urban form and mobility. I mentioned earlier that a really fundamental piece of our climate strategy and really our comprehensive plan is to create walkable neighborhoods where people can access most of the things they need on a daily basis on foot, and then you connect those neighborhoods by convenient, affordable transit and bikes. And so that's really what our mobility strategy is based around. We are growing. Our intent is to build up, not out. We have the zoning to do that. We're making some updates to it right now, but there is plenty of room, and it's going to make all of these systems much more efficient and much more affordable as we make better use of existing infrastructure. You see some of the examples of the development we're seeing along our transit arterials, and this illustrates the human scale of Portland. We're not a skyscraper town. We've got a lot of this kind of neighborhood Main Street scale of development, very lively street level retail, lots of activities, pretty nice feel to it, and we've got a lot of room for more of that. So a lot of our investment is channeled in these directions. So some of this is about the urban form. Some of this, of course, is just about habit. So we could walk places, and we sometimes choose not to. I once was talking to a French audience and showed this slide, and they thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen coming from an American. They thought this was just a joke others had about us, but that we didn't know about ourselves. And these things sometimes take time to change, and sometimes they change really quickly. Part of what we're trying to do is make sure we understand, as we're doing our land use planning, which parts of the city are walkable and which are not, and what the opportunities are to change that. So this is a fairly detailed analysis of where Portland's walkability is. And so the brighter areas are increasingly walkable, the blues, purples, much less so. And there's a clear pattern here, both on the left to the west side of town, we've got hills and streets that don't go through, very steep slopes, often difficult to get sidewalks in, not very walkable. And then on the flip side, on the east side of town, we have areas that were annexed to the city much more recently, many of them in the 90s even, and so they began to develop without the same kind of development standards that are pretty routine in urban areas, and they literally don't have sidewalks. So these are pretty big investment needs, and this helps reveal that and focus our resources and try to serve those areas in the long run with walkability, and in the near term we need other strategies. So transit, car sharing, how else can we do this? So the land use and urban form, a lot of this is about getting the zoning right, and then a lot of this is about creating places where people want to be, and those are often public places. So let's create our urban amenities, let's make it attractive and desirable for people to be outside in them. That draws more people out. Let's do our best to make sure that the modal systems connect. So you can park your bike and hop on the light rail, or you can take your bike with you on the light rail if you need it at the other end. There's a lot of attention to connectivity, both literally in a physical sense, but also making sure the systems work together. We need change, and the bicycling numbers I think are really encouraging because they illustrate how fast things are changing. So this is beginning in 2000, some of the cities that have really been working on bicycling, and it is really interesting to look all the way to the left side of the graph and realize we were all more or less at 2% bike share in as recently as 2000, and fast forward over to the right and there's a big cluster around 4%. In Portland we've seen even faster growth, so we're up now about 7% bike share. It's also revealing that the numbers are still pretty low. So you look at Amsterdam, you look at Copenhagen, and there's infrastructure there that will take us time to build to. There are also cultural differences that I think we can learn from. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue to push these numbers up, and this is something we really get value from seeing how it's working in other cities, comparing notes, and pushing one another. And so just to illustrate the scale of change, this is, a couple dozen cities, simple change in number of percentage points in bike mode share between 2000 and 2009, and look at how many showed a big increase. And this particular telling of the story, Portland, looks particularly good. But really the encouraging thing is that so many cities are making progress in this. And even the ones toward the right-hand side, this is now 5 years old, and I think we've seen some really terrific progress in a lot of those cities. So this is something we're all moving toward together. One of the really compelling examples of this in Portland is a new bridge across the Willamette River in downtown Portland. This was under construction probably last year. This bridge was completed and opened to the public just last month. It carries light rail, streetcar, buses, bicyclists, and pedestrians. It does not carry cars. And so as an example of the kind of investment we are putting our money where our mouth is on this. This bridge is the kind of infrastructure that we are going to want in the future, and so we're putting our money into it. It's also a good example of kind of climate-proofing, future-proofing infrastructure against climate changes, where the Willamette River here is tidally influenced. So we're upriver from the ocean, but the river levels are influenced by tides. And so we reran numbers based on some of the climate projections and realized that it was in our interest to raise the bridge span a little bit higher than the original design. And so the engineers went back and they changed that design, and so we're a little better future-proofed against climate changes. So it's a really fantastic experience. And I will say, one of the things that surprises me about going over the bridge that I really, really love is how quiet it is. So this bridge doesn't have the rattle of wheels of many, many cars and trucks, and it's a very peaceful experience. So not only are you getting less air pollution, but you're getting less noise pollution. I like going across it. All right, and one more glamour shot of the bridge, and then I'm going to pass it back to Susan here in just a second. There are still big parts of Portland that are not well served by transit. They are far apart, and bicycling is less attractive. What are our options there? These are often lower income parts of the community as well. So we certainly need things like car sharing, a really fantastic opportunity for some households for whom it works. And we want to make sure that car sharing is also, when it works, we want electric vehicles out there. We want vehicles you can rent by the minute. We want vehicles you can rent by the hour. We want all of these models. I think we'll see some shakeout of which models pencil financially over time. But right now, there are all kinds of really interesting mobility services that are emerging. We are welcoming them, and we want to make sure that they are reaching the people who most need them. So you put all the walking and the cycling and the car sharing and urban form together, and a little bit like the carbon graph, we've seen vehicle miles traveled in Portland decline in advance of the national trend. And again, it's really important that the national trend is now moving in that direction as well. So people are now driving a little bit less than they were back in 1990 per person, but they're driving quite a bit less than they were by the mid-90s. We saw that climb over the first half of the 90s pretty strongly, and we've seen a big change since then. So again, encouraging trend, long way to go.
I'll just jump in real quick. One of the interesting things that we did here in Portland about 6 years ago was we merged the traditional planning department with the Office of Sustainable Development. And so by doing that, we'd always work closely together. And for you all that are in cities or work a lot with cities, no matter how closely you work together, if you're not in the same department, there's a little bit of silo mentality and just not as much opportunity to mix and understand what each other does. So we had this great opportunity 6 years ago to bring all this much more closely together. So this graph, little picture here, is really just to have you kind of understand a little bit about our existing urban form. One of the unusual characteristics of Portland is that for the central city and most of the inner neighborhoods, so probably for 2/3 of the people actually who live in Portland, we have really small blocks. So they're 200 by 200 foot blocks, and that's really different than most American cities. And shorter blocks mean more places for pedestrians to be able to cross and better access for bikes and cars. It provides a more connected feeling for you if you're out walking, without the fear that if you made a wrong turn, you have to go all the way to the end of some much longer block or in a suburban neighborhood that probably most of us have lived in at some time in our life. You can end up, if you go the wrong way, having to walk a half mile around the cul-de-sacs and everything else to get back. So having and keeping these small blocks really is not something that most people think about when they're talking about sustainability, because we're so focused on the technologies and the behavior change and not thinking a lot about just how our cities are set up. From this next map, you can see that not all of Portland has these great blocks. And the eastern portion of the city that Michael mentioned a little bit ago when he was showing the picture of the 20-minute neighborhood. And when we say a 20-minute neighborhood, what we mean is that within 20 minutes, you can walk and get access to pretty much all the things you need, not your work perhaps, but on a daily basis. So stores and libraries and parks and beer and wine and all the important features that you want, restaurants. And so much of the city does have that, but not all of it. So part of the eastern part of the city was actually annexed about 25 to 30 years ago. And it pretty much resembles much of suburban America, much of suburban Portland. And in some areas even has sort of a semi-rural feel, large blocks, lots of missing streets that were never developed, and unfortunately, large areas without sort of the quality sidewalks. So when most people think of Portland, sort of the Portlandia, it's the area to the west of the circle there. And that's very, bikeable, walkable, wonderful close-in neighborhood. But unfortunately, in the eastern portion of the city, not a lot of grocery stores that are really easy to get to, a lack of parks, a lack of transit. It's also an area where many lower-income families and people of color over time have been moving to. So part of what's happened, just like in a lot of other cities, as the city becomes much more popular as a destination for people to move to, which we have become, housing prices have gone up, real estate prices have gone up for businesses, and while we are doing many things around trying to impact affordability, there is still some displacement, and some of that displacement is ending up outside of the city, but also more in East Portland. So this map shows the orange is sort of where lower income families live in Portland and compares it to where are frequent transit services. So the blue lines are where there's frequent transit service, and there's obviously transit service throughout the whole area, but it can take 20 or 30 minutes or more in between buses in some of those spots. So as we look to where this is again where sustainability is not just about the carbon emissions in the environment. We're very concerned about affordability. And so as we look to where should we be spending our very limited affordable housing dollars, for example, we're looking at maps like this, where we hope to increase investment in affordable housing, specifically in those areas there that aren't orange. So we want to add services where there are, we want to add people that are in, I should say not orange. So we want to add people into areas that have a large number of amenities. So places where indeed there are great transit service and other services. On the flip side, we want to increase the transit services to those areas where there are more existing lower income households. I guess one of the main things before I hand it over to Michael again is that so many people in Portland have come from somewhere else. And I think that's true of a lot of big cities now. But, the Bay Area of California, where many people come from to Portland, it's hard. I'm sure there's somebody from San Francisco on the line, but it's hard to call San Francisco a sustainable city if only wealthy people or the very, very poor get to live there. So affordable housing is now absolutely a centerpiece of all of our sustainability work.
So the inequities that Susan was describing really emerged as the dominant overriding issue in our citywide strategic plan, the Portland plan that was adopted a few years ago. And we are working on every front to address those, including through our carbon work. So as we went into this most recent update to our climate action plan, we did so with a very deliberate attempt to bring in voices that hadn't been at that table previously to really try to look at climate work through an equity perspective. And so that started with doing a whole scan of our previous climate plans, looking at others, seeing what people had done. We convened an equity work group of organizations across Portland that are equity advocates and trying to advance interests of different perspectives, different communities. We were fortunate to get an outside grant through the Partners for Places matching fund with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and the Funders Network for Smart Growth that let us provide resources directly to these organizations to help us think this through. And you'll see some of the results here in just a sec. We're also getting to an implementation guide. So yes, we need to carry out the climate plan, and we need to do it in certain ways with certain considerations and being really mindful of where the impacts and the benefits go to. So in the resulting plan, you'll see there's a very clear top-level vision that addresses equity. Communities are prioritized that either historically have not been a part of not enjoyed the benefits, or that are most vulnerable to some of the impacts. We're tracking our numbers with an eye to equity, and then the implementation guidance I mentioned. So just to illustrate what that looks like as a specific example, so previous climate plans have always pointed to sequestration as a current benefit, as well as all the other kind of natural systems benefits that additional tree planting and other green infrastructure provides. We haven't been that attentive to where that infrastructure goes, where the trees get planted. And so this time, top right corner, we map where our existing tree canopy is. Top left, we assess which parts of the city, and in this case county, are most vulnerable, which populations are most vulnerable to extreme heat events. Look at where those heat events are likely to be most intense, bottom left, and that's all funneling into where do we prioritize tree plantings, and then through what mechanisms, with what partners, and that leads us to both locating trees and programs to carry out the planting, maintenance, and care for them. So just to illustrate how this ends up playing out in real life. I think we have about 5 more minutes, and then we want to leave some time for questions. So we'll talk through a couple of these things pretty quickly.
Okay, I'll jump in here. So I'm going to switch to solid waste and consumption. About 5 years ago, we took a pretty bold step, and we turned our residential garbage system kind of upside down. We have large containers for recycling and yard waste and food waste, and then smaller containers for garbage. And the garbage only gets picked up every other week, while recycling and compost gets picked up every single week. So the result was sort of an instant 37% reduction in garbage. Overall, this has led us to a 70% recycling rate, about twice the national average. So we're also spending an increasing amount of time focused on keeping waste out of the system in the first place by buying more durable goods, helping residents think about ways to fix what they have, to invest in experiences instead of just buying more stuff. We also work with companies to help them minimize sort of the carbon intensity of all the products and the materials that they use to make their products. Many of you have probably done some kind of carbon inventory, either for your company or for your city. It looks like something on the left there usually, which is a production inventory. In Portland, shows 45% of our emissions come from the energy that's used in buildings, residential and commercial, a little under 20% for industry, and a little under 40% for transportation. The pie chart on the right really took us in a different direction to create it, which was looking at the inventory of carbon emissions from all the various products and services that we buy every day. So it includes the energy used to make and transport and sell the products or services. It's a really helpful tool for cities or for individuals to better understand how to reduce their own carbon footprint. And we can explain more about that if you want. We'll also explain this picture more later in the interest of time, but generally what this is trying to show is when you merge those two circles together, the blue on the right is all the stuff that we import. So everything from Asia, from the rest of America, and all the energy that we use and the emissions that came from everything we buy from someplace else. The green part is what we generate in the city and use in the city. And then the red circle is stuff where we generate emissions here, but we export it to someplace else. Very quickly, this just shows that a lot of energy is used to produce items, and a significant amount of emissions are generated when we use the product. So the production side is a lot, use of it is a lot, but the transportation of it is not really as high as you think it might be. And I think this is, once we went through all of the science of this, we were very surprised by this outcome. It is different for every kind of product. For example, the top bar shows emissions from cars, where a small portion comes from the construction of the car, but a large part comes from the gasoline that you burn. Again, all of this is in our plan. You can take a look at it. I want to switch briefly to talk about, walking our talk. What are we doing in our own city government to make a difference around energy efficiency, renewables, recycling, more efficient fleet, and such? As Michael mentioned a little bit ago, we're now saving about $7 million a year on our energy bills, and that's as, one project after another. And so as you do each of these projects, you don't think they're going to add up to be this much, but over time, and this has really been a couple decades of work, doing everything from lighting projects to major overhauls of water and wastewater systems. We're at about 80% renewable power for electricity that we use, and we'll be at 100%, hopefully within a year. And we're shifting about 20% of our fleet to electric vehicles. We cover an enormous amount of energy out of our wastewater treatment plant, a little under $1 million a year they save out there by generating power that they can then use on site. I think we have 500 kW of solar already, and we're close to having 700 kW of solar on our own facility. So that's a lot, and we have a lot more coming soon. Another fun project is with a company called Lucid, which is a local company, where we actually just put in the actual water system the ability to use the pressure of water just flowing downhill from our reservoirs in the mountains to generate electricity. One last comment before I hand it back to Michael is just that we found over the years that by being an early adopter on all these sustainable, using all these different sustainable products and technologies and services, that we have grown a lot, hundreds of companies related to green building and energy efficiency and renewables and waste reduction and stormwater management and all those things. And they do serve us here locally, but way more than probably 70% of their work is exported to everybody else. So they're working anywhere from, you know, California to Dubai and the rest of the world. It's become sort of the center point of our economic development strategy. We do a lot with software and athletic wear, like Nike here in Portland, but the whole area of building greener cities has become sort of an economic powerhouse for us also. That slide's sort of out of order, but it's our LED streetlights. And I'll hand it back to Michael.
So the last topic, just for a second here, is climate change preparation. You know, climate change is happening. We're already seeing it. It's only prudent to prepare for it. So we went through a fairly detailed process of assessing the risks that Portland faces, identifying vulnerabilities, and then developing a strategy to respond to those vulnerabilities. And you know, we're somewhat fortunate here in Portland, where you go through all the scenarios and we're a little less vulnerable than a lot of communities, and we thank our lucky stars. And we still really need to pay attention to some of these issues. So our approach to this was to look at our risks and vulnerabilities in infrastructure and built systems, look at natural systems, and then look at impacts on health and human services. And this is just sort of the process that led us through to recommendations. You know, these the details of this are much less important, I think, than the process. The conclusions are very specific to Portland's both geography and demographics. But for us, this kind of led to, in some really important ways, we need to continue doing what we're doing with respect to investments in green infrastructure and natural areas. We also know that you know, our climate is changing. We're expecting more drought in the summers. We certainly will see warmer winters, and so that's got some impacts on snowpack, not sort of immediately to Portland or in our water supply, but certainly on the larger region. These are really significant changes. And then there are a lot of things that we are still getting our heads around, especially in terms of how air quality may be affected by more extreme heat events and, you know, fairly important microclimates within the city. So we're going to invest in additional sensors so we can understand this better, and then analysis to do that. And we often do that in partnership with Portland State University. So to wrap up then, I think the big takeaway from all of our work over the years is, you know, if you pursue sustainability in your city, but you end up with a city nobody wants to live in, not a success. And so everything we do, it's got to be advancing equity, it's got to be advancing quality of life. And, you know, people like to have fun, and they like to have fun when they're doing these projects, and they definitely like to have fun when they're done with them. So for us, reminding ourselves that quality of life is really fundamental, is core to all of the work we do, certainly anything that has to do with sustainability. So with that, I think we've squeezed our question time a little bit, but happy to turn it back over to you, Dick, and if there are questions from the field, we'll answer as many as we have time for.
All right, Susan and Michael, thanks for an outstanding presentation. We do have a lot of questions coming in, so let's get right to them. First question is, how are you planning for seniors and the disabled?
Good question. So we have done some recent work focused on people with disabilities, and realizing that when we started with looking at demographics in particular, because a lot of the city is aging, but it's also, we don't think of that most of us at some time in our lives will become disabled in one way or another as we get older. So we are focused on transportation, good transit, making sure that we are providing affordable living places along centers and corridors and areas, and trying to create, again, sort of these 20-minute neighborhoods as much as possible where people don't have to be able to get into their car, as that becomes a limiting factor as we age.
Okay, next question. What is your current thinking regarding district energy? Would it be heating and cooling?
Yeah, so Portland has a couple of sort of modest-scaled district energy systems. One of them is a district cooling system, a couple district heating systems. We have a pretty mild climate, and so the demand is not that, so the opportunity is not that big. We also have really low energy prices, and so we definitely evaluate district energy. And there are some, major, when you're having a lot of development come out of the ground at the same time, it's absolutely an opportunity, and we work with developers to make sure it's part of the analysis. It looks like it will happen in several of our more concentrated kind of commercial areas that are now redeveloping. We also, you look at what you can gain through district energy. You also look at the trend of improving building performance. And, the real opportunity with district energy is with buildings that use a ton of energy. And those tend to be our existing buildings, and it's a little more expensive to go back through and connect those to the system. It's easier to do district energy with new development, but those also tend to be our more efficient buildings. And so, we want to be open-eyed about that, and this is one that really does depend on local, both climate, energy prices, and just sort of where your development pattern is. And so I don't think there's a universal answer to that question. We definitely we need our developers to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, and so that's how we're approaching it.
All right, thanks, Michael. Next question, not surprising, a funding question. What was the major source of funding for the pedestrian paths and parks that replaced the highways and roads along the waterfront?
Oh, ancient history.
I think most of us were in elementary school or anyway at that time. So it was a mix of, for example, the Mount Hood Freeway, and then moving that to use that for light rail. At that time, that was sort of heresy. That was not something that was an allowable use of transportation funds. Our mayor, who went on to become, I think, Secretary of Transportation years, not too much longer after he had sort of pulled off that coup of being able to use federal funds for light rail. So on any major transportation project, whether it's a road or a bridge or whatever, it always has a mix of federal, state, and local dollars. In those cases, the parks funding was primarily more local and regional dollars. So we try to do a lot of our funding for parks that serve the entire region, also on a regional basis. So a real mix of funding sources.
All right, next question. Are infrastructure costs higher with small street blocks, the 200 by 200?
Infrastructure, not that we know of. I mean, the beauty of it from a business point of view is you've got more corners, and corners are what help sell retail. So I think we like to think that the whole reason we have these 200 by 200 blocks was some great knowledge of land use planning in the beginning that was going to help us be a super efficient city. But I think it was really about dollars and being able to sell more by having more corners for shopping. We do know that infrastructure costs in these areas compared to suburban infrastructure, and that you can have so many more people in a smaller area, and so continuing to use this infrastructure well versus growing into a greenfield is much more efficient. One of the answers, though, about the 200 by 200 is yes, we do have a whole lot more public right-of-way because of this, which is to a benefit in some ways, in that we have a lot of right-of-way that we can put things in, broadband or anything else. And it does mean that we have less taxable, square miles of the city. So there are definitely some financial impacts, but more than made up for, I think, by the benefits of being able to have a more dense, compact urban growth.
Okay, we are running out of time, but we're going to ask just two more questions. This one is, how are you communicating to the public that you are doing this? That is, what public campaigns help the public feel good about the way government does good work?
I'll start, and then Michael can jump in here. So one of the, we do a lot of presentations, and in the beginning, when we were, just a small office, we have attracted a lot of foundation and other funding sources to do the work we do. So we have a crew of about 40 people, of which 2 or 3 are actually general fund, that are out doing this work in the community. It's very much not regulatory and very much about information and education and trainings, and we also do a lot of communications and have tried as hard as we can to have good rapport with the media to be able to tell our stories. We also don't talk about climate change that much over the years. What we talk about are the things people really care about, which increasingly over maybe the past 3 or 4 years is the issue of climate change. But mostly we talk about saving money, being more comfortable, getting to work easier, less traffic congestion, all of those kinds of things.
Okay, this will have to be our last question. What is Portland doing specifically to contain housing costs?
This is the topic of the day.
We can both jump in here too. So we are, unlike most cities, we don't have inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning is when you require developers to actually build a certain number of affordable housing. But we do have tax increment financing, so we have a requirement that 30% of all new developments that are in urban renewal areas, that 30% of the funding that we have available for improvements will go towards affordable housing. There is a proposal to council that will be coming up in the next, actually this month, to increase that number to 45%. It is an increasingly hard number, or hard issue for the city, and we are, just I think like any other city, working at on the bigger scale. The issue is not just about finding funding for affordable housing; it's about keeping up with demand. So our vacancy rates are like,
less than 3%.
Less than 3%, and it's supply and demand. So we need to build our way out of this. And many cities sort of have put up impediments to building, and I think we have made a real commitment to building, especially along our transit corridors and our centers in these sort of 20-minute neighborhoods, to increase the number of people that can take advantage of those areas.
Okay, well, it looks like we've run out of time, so if we didn't have a chance to get to your particular question, please let us know in the brief survey that will pop up following the webcast. Susan and Michael, once again, I'd like to thank you for an excellent presentation, and thanks again to Crescent Electric Supply Company for making this webinar possible. We certainly couldn't do it without their support. Okay, that'll do it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Dave.